A lonely lumberjack rescues a wounded woman lost in the jungle. She turns out to be a millionaire. The fog clung low to the forest floor, thick and heavy like breath held too long. Pines stood like sentinels, their trunks fading into gray mist, the morning stillness broken only by the soft crunch of damp leaves under Rowan's boots. He moved with quiet purpose, a small bundle of cedar bark and spruce tips tied at his side, heading toward the stream where the best herbs grew. He was almost there when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the forest. A groan, faint, raw, human. He froze. Then it came again, just beyond the ridge. Rowan dropped his pack and sprinted. The fog thickened, swallowing branches and earth alike, but he moved as if the woods were part of his skin. He pushed past a fallen log, ducked beneath a branch, and there, half covered in leaves and pine needles, was a woman. She was unconscious, her blonde hair tangled, dirt smeared across her cheek. Her hiking jacket was torn at the sleeve, blood darkening the fabric. One boot missing, her ankle twisted awkwardly, and her wrist, already swelling. But what caught Rowan's eye was the silver chain around her neck. Snapped open. A locket had fallen into the leaves nearby, open, a small scrap of paper barely peeking out. He crouched beside her, checking her breath. It was there, shallow, quick. She stirred slightly when he brushed a leaf from her forehead. "You're all right," he whispered, mostly to himself. With practiced hands, Rowan shrugged off his coat and gently laid it over her, shielding her from the morning chill. Then, moving with careful strength, he slipped his arms beneath her and lifted her from the ground. She was lighter than he expected. Her head rested against his chest as he turned back toward the path he came from, navigating the woods like he had done 1,000 times before. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had begun its slow climb behind the clouds. Rowan pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepping into a room filled with the faint scent of cedarwood and beeswax. He laid her on the cot near the fire, stoking the coals until the warmth reached her cheeks. He cleaned her wounds silently, dipping cloth in warm water, dabbing at the cuts on her hands and the bruises blooming down her leg. She stirred once, wincing, but did not wake. Rowan worked slowly, methodically, wrapping her wrist in cloth soaked with comfrey and ginger root. Then he paused. The locket. He retrieved it from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the small table beside the cot. He had not read the paper inside. That wasn't his place. As the fire crackled, Rowan stepped away and lit the small lantern that always sat near the bed. He adjusted its height, casting a soft golden light over the room. Warm and comforting. He took a clean scrap of paper and scribbled a note in his steady hand, placing it on the nightstand next to the locket and a steaming mug of cedar tea. "If you wake and I'm not here, just follow the scent of cedar tea." And then he left the room, the soft creak of the door closing behind him. Moments later, Evelyn stirred. Her vision swam, but the smell of cedar pulled her from the edge of pain. She blinked at the light, at the wooden beams above her, at the soft rustle of the fire. Her hand drifted to the mug, then to the note, then finally to the locket. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching, and looked around. The room was quiet, but she was not alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe under the soft light of the cabin's lantern. Evelyn sat quietly near the hearth, her legs curled beneath a thick wool blanket. The steam from the cedar tea curled in the air, untouched. She had not said much since waking. In fact, she had said almost nothing at all. Rowan did not press her. He moved through the space with quiet rhythm, lighting the fire, setting bowls of soup on the table, and folding an extra blanket over the back of the chair nearest to her. He had learned long ago that silence had its own voice. That night he served her a bowl of soup, root vegetables, wild mushrooms, and a hint of cinnamon. She took it without a word but nodded, once in thanks. The flavor surprised her. It was rustic, earthy, warm, nothing like the sterile take-out containers and rushed lunches of her old world. Days passed. Evelyn's ankle healed slowly. She still spoke little, her eyes often lost in thought as she sat by the window watching the fog roll over the treetops. But Rowan didn't fill the space with questions. He simply brought her warm compresses for her wrist, showed her how to apply honey balm to her scrapes, and handed her a bundle of lavender to place near her pillow. One afternoon, he guided her outside on crutches. They stopped by a log where he had laid out tools. He showed her how to split kindling, light pieces, careful movements. She laughed softly when her first try sent the wood flying sideways. Rowan just grinned and handed her another. That evening, Evelyn tossed and turned on the cot, unable to sleep. The forest sounds were too loud, too alive. Every creak and chirp reminded her how far she was from home and how much she still didn't understand. She turned toward the table, hoping to find the tea still warm. What she saw instead was a small wooden figure, a fox, barely the size of her palm, carved with careful hands and smoothed from years of holding. It was placed gently beside her lantern, as if it had always been there. She picked it up. It was light, perfectly balanced. A smile broke across her face, small, unexpected, but real, the first since she had opened her eyes in this cabin. In the morning, she asked the first question since waking. This place, did it used to be something more? Rowan looked up from where he was grinding herbs by the stove. His eyes softened, and he nodded. This cabin used to be a clinic, he said. A small field station, almost 2 decades ago. It was full of people then. Families, elders, children, all cared for by a woman named Hannah. Evelyn's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Hannah? She repeated. Yes, Rowan said, meeting her gaze. Dr. Hannah Blair. She ran this place for 3 years straight. Saved my mother's life. Saved a lot of people. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the wooden fox. She knew that name better than any other in her life. And for the first time, something flickered behind her silence. Not confusion, not fear, but recognition. 6 weeks earlier, Evelyn Blair stood in the corner office on the 49th floor, arms crossed tightly over her chest as the city stretched endlessly beneath her. New York glittered like it always did, cold, confident, and untouchable. Just like her. Or so people thought. That morning, the hospice had called. Miss Blair, I'm so sorry your mother passed at 3:07, i.e. Emming. Evelyn had thanked the voice politely, hung up, then returned to her 9 a.m. meeting, as if nothing had changed. Because in some ways, it hadn't. Her mother, Dr. Hannah Blair, had been gone long before death took her, absent in spirit even when her body was still breathing. She had grown up with the name Hannah Blair etched in headlines, humanitarian awards, medical journals, a savior to thousands. And yet, Evelyn had no memory of a bedtime story, no trace of lullabies, just long silences, disciplined words, and the endless sting of absence disguised as ambition. That evening, Evelyn returned to her penthouse, removed her heels, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the single thing she'd kept since childhood, her mother's locket. Hannah had given it to her on her 8th birthday. She had never opened it. Somehow, it felt like that act would be too intimate. But tonight she opened it. Inside was not a picture, but a fragile piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, folded into thirds. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. Coordinates, latitude and longitude, and below, her mother's handwriting, for the day you're ready to forgive me. Her stomach twisted. Forgive? For what? Her first impulse was to crumple it, but she couldn't. She stared at the coordinates for what felt like hours, then typed them into her phone. A forest. Northern Canada, miles from the nearest road, middle of nowhere. And still, something inside her stirred. The next morning, Evelyn canceled 2 board meetings. She told her assistant she needed personal leave. No one questioned her. Evelyn Blair never took time off. 2 days later, she flew to Calgary, then took a bush plane north. She hired a quiet guide named Alain, who barely spoke and didn't ask questions. They drove as far as the jeep would go, then stopped at the edge of the tree line. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Storm's coming." "I'll be fine," she replied, and took her pack. She wasn't fine. By the second day, her boots were soaked, her jacket torn, and her hands raw from grabbing at tree roots. The forest was thick, old, alive in a way that made her feel like an intruder. Still, she pressed on. The map her mother left, scribbled in the margin of the GPS coordinates, led her to a rocky hill. From the top, she thought she saw something, a shadow, a roofline maybe. Her heart pounded. She stepped forward. The ground slipped. She tumbled hard, her ankle twisting, her wrist slamming against a jagged stone. Pain flared white. Her vision blurred. She tried to call out, but the sound barely escaped her lips. Her backpack slid down the slope. Her body followed. When she landed, it was in silence. She lay in the wet moss, shivering, breath shallow, blood trickling from a scrape on her temple. The chain of the locket snapped, catching on a branch. It fell into the mud beside her. Her last thought before everything went black was not of the boardroom or the city or her carefully constructed empire. It was of her mother's voice, cold, distant, unreadable, saying once, long ago, "Some love doesn't look the way you want it to. That doesn't mean it isn't real." Then the forest took her. The fire crackled gently in the cabin stove. Outside, dusk was settling over the trees, mist curling through the moss like breath. Rowan was sorting dried herbs on a woven mat near the window, his movements quiet and methodical. Evelyn sat across the room, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her injured wrist gently bandaged with his careful touch. She had not spoken much in the past 2 days. Her voice had remained in the shadows of her throat. But now, as Rowan laid a handful of cedar leaves into a small clay bowl, she cleared her voice and asked softly, "Who was Hannah to you?" The room seemed to still. Rowan's hands paused mid-motion. He did not look up right away. His breath exhaled slowly. Then, quietly, he said, "She saved my mother's life." Evelyn blinked. Rowan rose to his feet and moved to sit across from her, settling into the worn chair opposite the fire. His voice was even, but something shifted in his eyes, something ancient and tender. "My mother was caught in a snare trap when I was 7. Her leg was nearly gone when I found her. She was bleeding bad, deep into the woods. I thought I'd lose her that night." He glanced down at his calloused fingers. "But someone found us, a woman, brown hair pulled back in a messy braid, eyes sad, like they'd seen too much. She carried my mother back here to this cabin. I remember her voice, steady, gentle. She told me, 'Go get water, just keep going, and don't look back.'" Evelyn's throat tightened. "She stitched her up, stayed with us 3 days. No questions, no judgment, just healing." Rowan leaned back. "She wore a locket. She never spoke about where she came from, but I never forgot her. After my mother recovered, she used to talk about the lady with the burdened eyes. That was Hannah Blair." Evelyn stared at the flame. "She never told me that story." Rowan gave her a long look. "I doubt she told anyone much." He stood and gestured for her to follow. With her wrists still tender, she moved slowly, slipping on her boots, clutching the edges of her coat. The air outside was sharp with pine and earth. They walked in silence along a narrow trail, leaves crunching beneath their feet, until they reached a large cedar tree whose roots spread wide like open hands. Rowan knelt, brushing aside damp leaves and soil, until he uncovered a small patch of disturbed ground. He began to dig, fingers working the earth like someone returning home. Within moments, he unearthed a rusted tin box. He handed it to Evelyn. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, wrapped in wax cloth, was a leather-bound notebook, a photo, worn at the edges, of a young girl with wide, uncertain eyes, herself, perhaps age 5, and a letter, folded neatly, never sealed. Evelyn's breath caught as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Firm, clear. "My Evelyn," it began. "I tried to be 2 things, a healer to the world and a mother to you. I failed at both more times than I can count, but I never stopped loving you. Not once, not in all the years and all the countries I drifted through. I wore your photo in my locket because I needed to remember what love looked like. I left this place, hoping that someday, if you ever found it, you might understand the part of me I could never explain. I did not leave you to chase glory. I left because I believed the world needed something from me, and I never found a way to forgive myself for what it cost you. If you are reading this, then maybe..." Maybe you are ready to forgive me. And if not, I still love you, always did. Hannah Evelyn's vision blurred. The notebook slipped into her lap. She covered her mouth with her hand, the sob rising quietly at first, then uncontrollably. She folded forward, forehead resting on the letter, the paper now damp from her tears. It was not just the apology that broke her. It was the truth in it. For the first time in her life, Evelyn did not feel abandoned. She felt understood. She felt seen. Rowan stood beside her, silent, not reaching for her, just present, as if he knew the power of letting grief breathe. And under the old cedar tree, Evelyn cried, not for what she had lost, but for what she had finally found. The days began to bleed together, not in a haze, but in a rhythm Evelyn had never known before. A rhythm made of small rituals, soft silences, and hands that worked not for gain, but for life. Each morning, Rowan would knock gently on the cabin post, a steaming mug of cedar tea in his hand. Evelyn, wrapped in one of his flannel shirts that now fit her better than her city clothes ever had, would accept it with a grateful nod. They did not rush. Time, in this place, unfolded like the mist over the trees, slow, deliberate, sacred. One morning they planted radishes. The soil was rich, dark, fragrant with the musk of the forest. Evelyn crouched awkwardly beside Rowan as he showed her how to press each seed just right. Her manicure was long gone, dirt caked under her nails. She laughed, actually laughed when a worm wriggled out near her wrist and made her squeal. "You're getting better," Rowan said. "Better at planting or better at squealing?" she shot back. He smirked. Afternoons were often spent with the villagers who still lived in the hills nearby, families with limited access to health care, women with weathered hands and soft smiles, children who ran barefoot even in the chill of October. Evelyn helped wrap ankles, clean scrapes, boil water, and distribute salves Rowan prepared from wild herbs. She listened. That was the biggest thing. She had built an empire teaching people how to talk faster, think smarter. But here she learned to sit in the quiet, to nod without needing to answer, to offer her hands instead of her mind. And every evening they cooked together. Vegetable stews, grilled fish caught in the river, bread baked in a cast-iron pan over the fire pit. She watched Rowan slice vegetables with ease, move around the kitchen without sound, as if the place had molded itself to his every step. It was a dance he never choreographed, yet always performed perfectly. One evening, as the stars began to scatter across the navy sky, Roland disappeared briefly. When he returned, he handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a carved wooden locket, shaped like a maple leaf, sanded smooth, tied with a leather string. She traced the grain with her fingers. "It's beautiful." He cleared his throat. "It's for you." "Why?" He shrugged, but his voice was softer. "Because you came here during the fall, and somehow you stayed." Her fingers tightened around the leaf. "Thank you," she whispered. That night they sat by the fire again. Evelyn had brought her mother's journal and began reading aloud one of the entries, written in shaky ink, a rant about an impossible childbirth, a pot of burned soup, and a bat that had flown through the rafters during a midnight fever. "She was the mess," Evelyn said, laughing. "She was human," Rowan replied. Evelyn looked at him, her smile lingering. "I never thought of her like that before." Later they climbed onto the slanted rooftop of the cabin, each with a blanket wrapped around their shoulders. The stars above were infinite, sharper than city lights, clearer than any screen. The silence stretched between them, warm instead of cold. Rowan's hand reached out, brushing lightly against hers. She did not pull away. "You're not like the world you came from," he said softly. She turned to him, the starlight glinting in her eyes. "Neither are you." The wind stirred the trees below. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. When they climbed down, neither spoke of what came next. It was not the kind of thing that needed planning. The fire still glowed in the pit. Rowan tossed another log into the flame. Evelyn sat beside him, their shoulders touching. her body aware of every inch of space that was no longer between them. He looked at her, not with hunger but with something far deeper, a kind of reverence, like he was still trying to believe she was real. And she leaned in first. The kiss was quiet. It tasted of cedar smoke and breath held too long. No promises, no declarations, just two souls, each marked by grief, each rebuilt by kindness, meeting in the hush between heartbeats. For Evelyn, it was not fireworks. It was a fireplace. It was home. The call came just as the sun dipped below the treetops. Evelyn stood at the edge of the clearing, the cabin behind her bathed in amber light. Rowan inside slicing carrots for dinner. Her phone, mostly untouched since she arrived, buzzed violently in her jacket pocket. She answered, more from instinct than intention. "Miss Blair," came her assistant's breathless voice. "We need you back. It's the Soul acquisition. One of the senior VPs leaked sensitive data. The press is circling and investors are threatening to pull. We're holding it together for now, but we don't know for how long." Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of headlines, boardrooms, emergency meetings, of the empire she had built with her name stitched onto every corner of it. And she thought of Rowan, the man whose hands grew food from stone, whose words were few but always landed like truth. That night, she sat across from him in the cabin, the fire casting shadows across the wooden floor. He passed her a bowl of stew. She did not eat. He noticed. "You got a call," he said simply. "Yes. Something big?" "Very." He nodded once, like he had expected nothing less. She stared at the bowl in her lap. Then she looked at him. His beard caught the firelight. His eyes were calm, as always. But tonight they searched hers like he already knew what she was about to ask. "Would you come with me?" she said, her voice softer than a whisper. He didn't speak for a long moment. He set down his bowl. His fingers rested on the edge of the table. Then, quietly, "No." Her breath caught. "Why not?" He looked at her, not with harshness, not with judgment, but with a kind of aching acceptance. "You belong to 1,000 voices," he said. "I belong to the silence." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them dry. "You could learn to live in my world." "I could," he said, "but I'd vanish in it." She didn't argue. She couldn't. Because in her heart she knew he was right. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat beside each other, shoulder to shoulder, watching the fire slowly burn itself down to embers. No words, just breath and presence. At dawn, Evelyn packed the few things she had brought, jeans now stained with soil, a sweater that smelled like cedar and smoke, her mother's journal, the wooden locket. She paused before she zipped her bag. Then, slowly, she untied the locket from her neck. She walked to Rowan's bed and placed it on the pillow. He was chopping kindling outside, as if to spare her the goodbye. When she stepped out, he turned, wiping his hands on a cloth. Their eyes met across the clearing. She didn't hug him. He didn't kiss her. They simply looked. And that, somehow, was more than enough. She turned and walked away, her boots crunching softly against the frost-covered path. Rowan stood in the doorway long after she disappeared from sight. Later, he entered the cabin, saw the locket, lifted it gently, as if it were made of glass, not wood. He held it to his chest. He did not cry, but the firelight caught the mist in his eyes, and he sat there, holding her last gesture, knowing love had entered his world like a season, and left like one too. But some seasons stay, even if they don't return. The city was exactly as she remembered it, cold in its precision, loud in its ambition, and always, always moving. But Evelyn had changed. The elevator doors opened into the top floor of the Blair Tech headquarters, and she stepped into a world that once felt like home. Her office was untouched, her chair still turned toward the skyline, her desk lined with awards and digital assistant screens that blinked on at her presence. She stood in the center of it all, waiting to feel something. But the lights overhead were too white, the silence too sterile. The air was filtered, not lived in. No scent of cedar, no sound of fire crackling, no heartbeat in the walls. The meeting that followed was quick and decisive. The board tried to talk her out of it. "You built this company," one of them said, wide-eyed. "Yes," Evelyn replied, "which is exactly why I know when it no longer needs me." They called it a sabbatical. She called it surrender. Not to failure, to purpose. Within 2 months, she founded a new organization. Not one built on stock prices or tech ventures, but on healing. She called it Hannah's Light Foundation. Its mission was clear: to bring quality medical access to the farthest reaches of the map, places like the village her mother once served, places with no funding, no media coverage, no glamorous ribbon cuttings, just need, real human need. She met with local health workers, partnered with grassroots organizations, and traveled, not for conferences but for clinics. She sat with midwives, listened to elders, wrote grants that felt like promises instead of transactions. She kept her mother's journal on her desk. Each time she doubted herself, she reread the page with the line, "I couldn't be both, but I never stopped loving you." And somehow she found a way to be both. Each facility they built bore a small emblem above the door, a carved wooden leaf modeled after the one Rowan had given her, not flashy, just present. One afternoon, nearly a year after she had left the cabin, Evelyn stood in her new downtown office, no longer towering, no longer glass-walled, just a cozy corner suite in a shared building filled with nonprofits. She pulled a parcel from the drawer. Inside were 3 things: the latest edition of a practical medicine handbook, marked with notes in the margins, her handwriting looping with ideas, a photo of the first field clinic, smiling volunteers standing under a banner that read, "This place was once a dream," and a new wooden locket, almost identical to the one Rowan had given her, except this time there was something carved inside. "For the man who taught me how to forgive." She wrapped the items carefully, tied the box with twine, and addressed it by hand. There was no guarantee it would reach him, but some things, she had learned, didn't need guarantees. Only intention. Weeks later, somewhere deep in the forest, a man walked out to his porch and found a package resting on a flat stone. Rowan opened it slowly, turning each item over in his calloused hands. He did not smile, but he did something rarer. He closed his eyes and let the warmth bloom quietly in his chest. She was still walking the path, and somehow she had made space for him along the way. Without a map, without a promise, just a light and a name. The morning mist curled through the trees like a gentle welcome. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, and the sound of distant laughter echoed from behind the trees. Evelyn stepped off the narrow footpath, her boots leaving faint impressions in the softened soil. In her hand was a satchel, light, practical, no boardroom suits, no briefcase. Just a notebook, a bottle of cedar tea, and her mother's journal. It had been exactly 1 year. The cabin came into view like a memory returning, unchanged, yet somehow more alive. New flower beds bloomed outside the window, and a hand-painted sign marked the entrance now. Hannah's Light, Field Station. She paused at the threshold, unsure for just a breath of a second. Then the door opened, and there he was. Rowan stood in the doorway, still tall, still quiet, still with those eyes that had seen both solitude and storm. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands speckled with soil. He blinked once, then twice, unsure if she was real. Evelyn offered a small smile. "Hi." He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She stepped forward. "I came back," she said, "not for answers, but because love, it's not in the city anymore." He exhaled, just one slow breath, and reached out. They embraced without a single word, and it was enough. The clinic was busier now. There were new beds in the back, a shelf stocked with antibiotics and donated wound kits, and 3 medical students from the city taking notes in the corner as a local woman explained how to grind healing roots. The place hummed with quiet purpose, like a symphony of soft movements and softer voices. Evelyn fit in like she had never left. She helped label medicine jars, taught basic anatomy to the volunteers, and sat with elderly villagers who told her about the children Rowan had delivered, the animals he had rescued, the lives he had saved. In the evenings she wrote, by lamplight, her mother's journal beside her and Rowan's old radio playing in the background. She wasn't writing a business plan or a press release. She was writing a book. About mothers who didn't know how to love out loud. About daughters who needed to walk into the woods to understand why. About a man with no wealth, but a heart big enough to hold silence, and someone else's sorrow. One afternoon, Evelyn was reading to a group of children under the big cedar tree just outside the station. Her voice carried gently, the story unfolding from a hand-bound book she had written and illustrated herself. A little girl with bright eyes and tangled braids leaned close and whispered, "Are you two married?" Evelyn looked up. Rowan was across the clearing, helping a boy carve a walking stick. She laughed softly. "No, but we're something more." The girl tilted her head. "What's more than married?" Evelyn thought for a moment, then closed the book. "We're unfinished stories that finally found their ending." That night they sat together on the porch. No fire, just the wind rustling through the canopy, the flicker of distant stars, and the faint smell of rosemary from the herb garden Rowan had planted by the stairs. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. He reached for her hand. In her palm she held the wooden locket. He looked at it, then at her. "It's yours," she said. "It was always yours," he answered. They didn't speak much after that. They just watched. Children played beneath the tree, chasing each other in the dusk. A woman sang in her native language as she washed dishes nearby. A boy carried a bundle of kindling toward the fire pit. Life continued around them, quiet, healing, honest, and for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like she had to lead it. She only had to live it. Later, as they stood in the doorway, she looked up and said, "I used to believe love needed to be proven, earned, defined, but maybe it just needs to be shown, quietly, consistently, like a light that never stops glowing." Rowan kissed her temple. "And some lights," he said. "Don't just guide us, they bring us home." Evelyn smiled, tears forming, but this time she let them fall freely. The wind shifted, the clouds parted, and the moonlight caught the edge of her locket, casting a soft, golden beam across the wooden frame of the door. She closed her fingers around it. They stood like that for a long time. No promises, no grand declarations, just presence, just peace. Just two souls, unfinished once, finally coming home. If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you of the quiet kind of love that heals, of the forgiveness we owe ourselves, or of the journeys that begin not with footsteps, but with questions left behind, then we invite you to stay with us. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we bring you tales that matter, stories of hearts mended in silence, of connections born in the most unexpected places, and of people who find their way home, often without knowing they were lost. If you believe in the power of a story to change someone's day, or maybe even their life, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and helps them find the souls who need them most. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the softest voice carries the loudest truth.